The kingdom of stone and sky, of House Fowler, was yet another powerful kingdom of the first men in Dawn, though this kingdom was probably set up during the Age of Heroes. The ancestors of House Fowler had settled in the lands that bordered Dawn and the Reach, and this must have happened when most of the first men were leaving the harsh deserts of Dawn. These lands, that were named the Wide Way during the Age of Heroes, and later renamed the Prince's Pass during the rule of the Targaryens, was, and still is, the major route used to enter Dawn from the Reach and the Stormlands. The ancestors of the Fowlers must have decided to settle in this region that was dominated by mountains and deserts, because of the river that originates from the Wide Way. Though this river did not create a vast oasis like the Torrentine, the ancestors of the Fowlers settled on its banks, and they became protective and possessive of it and the Wide Way. During the early stages of the Age of Heroes, House Fowler was created, and they later set up their great city of Skyreach. This formidable castle offered the Fowlers a great vantage point over those who wished to cross the Wide Way, which must have allowed the Fowler kings to stop any invasion into their lands, and also exact a tax on any who wished to cross the Wide Way, which in turn must have enriched the kingdom of Stone and Sky. Their wealth could have enabled the Fowler kings to construct another castle in the Wide Way, and that castle would later on be called King's Grave. Other than taxing all who passed through the Wide Way, I think the Fowler kings could also have been raiders, especially during lean times, for their lands could not have supported much agricultural production, meaning that they had to attack other lands, in particular the Reach, in order to get food. This theory is supported by the fact that the Kingdom of Stone and Sky constantly fought with the Kingdom of the Reach. An example of this was when King Ferrys Fowler attacked the Reach with an army of 10,000 soldiers, but his army was vanquished by King Garth the Seventh Gardener. Despite this defeat, the Fowler kings must have remained a thorn in the side of the kings of the Reach for millennia. The Stone and Sky Kingdom must have suffered through the cataclysmic Long Night that devastated the world of ice and fire, but the Fowler kings survived this disaster, and they went on to reclaim their kingdom, and they soon came to exact their former influence over the Wide Way. But like every other kingdom of the first men in Dawn, and Westeros at large, the Fowler kings faced challenges from their neighbors, and House Ironwood was the main aggressor of the Stone and Sky Kingdom. The Ironwoods must have wanted to control the Wide Way, for this would have brought them a step closer to gaining control over the whole of Dawn, but the Fowler kings stood in the way of this vision. And it is also possible that the Ironwoods needed the Wide Way for trade, for their own Stone Way was less conducive for trade, but the Ironwoods, who had dubbed themselves the High Kings of Dawn, must have been angered by the tax they had to pay in order to pass through the Wide Way. Another issue of contention between these two kingdoms might have been the control of the river the ancestors of the Fowlers had settled next to. For the same river was also important to the Ironwoods, as their ancestors had settled on its mouth on the Sea of Dawn, and therefore the Ironwood kings might have desired to control it. In order to weaken the Fowler kings, I think the Ironwoods might have helped another house called Manwoody to take the second castle the Stone and Sky kings had constructed in the Red Mountains, and if this was the case, then it must have weakened the Fowlers' hold over the Wide Way. This, plus the superior armies of the Ironwoods, could have granted victory for the Stoneway kings, but I think the Torrentine kings, who were also targeted by the Ironwoods because of their Torrentine kingdom, might have evened the field by fighting besides the Fowler kings, which in turn helped the Fowlers to maintain their Stone and Sky kingdom. The later coming of the Andals to Westeros must have been a great challenge to the Fowler kings, just like it was for the Dane kings. Unlike the Danes, the Fowlers must have chosen to marry Andal princesses in order to preserve their kingdom. However, the Stone and Sky kingdom failed to withstand House Nymeros Martell and its rulers, Prince Mors and Princess Nymeria. For after the wedding of Princess Nymeria and Lord Mors Martell, and the formation of House Nymeros Martell, Prince Mors and Princess Nymeria set about unifying the whole of Dawn under their rule. This put House Nymeros Martell in contention with various kingdoms in Dawn that fought to retain their independence. The aged and blind king, Garrison Fowler, was one of the kings that rejected Nymeria and Mors, and his army fought for the independence of the Stone and Sky kingdom. But House Nymeros Martell was eventually successful, and the defeated Stone and Sky king, Garrison Fowler, was captured and sent to the wall in golden chains. This marked the end of the Stone and Sky kingdom, and House Fowler was reduced from being kings to being vassal lords under the rule of House Nymeros Martell. House Fowler would continue to be influential in political matters in Westeros as they helped Dorne to retain its independence by fighting Aegon the Conqueror. And House Fowler chose to remain loyal to House Nymeros Martell after Prince Maron Martell agreed to join the rest of the Six Kingdoms under the rule of the Iron Throne. The Fowlers are still active in current events of the world of ice and fire, as the twins Jane and Jenelyn Fowler have close relationships with both Aegon Martell and Nymeria Sand. The Kingdom of the Stone Way of House Ironwood was the last of the greatest kingdoms of Dorne, and it was by far the largest and most powerful of all the great kingdoms of Dorne. The ancestors of House Ironwood had settled in the northeastern region of Dorne, probably when most First Men were leaving Dorne. This region is bordered by the eastern range of the Red Mountains and the Sea of Dorne. Most importantly, this region is next to a rugged path through the eastern range of the Red Mountains that leads to the Stormlands, and this path was named the Stone Way during the Age of Heroes. The ancestors of House Ironwood must have settled on the mouth of the river that originates from the Wide Way. During the Age of Heroes, House Ironwood was formed, and they would eventually construct their City of Ironwood on the slopes of the Red Mountains overlooking the Stone Way. Castle Ironwood was probably the first stronghold built in the Stone Way, and it enabled the Ironwoods to control movement in and out the Stone Way, which in the long run made them rich and powerful. It was this rise in power that made the Ironwoods to declare themselves as kings. This emboldened the Ironwoods to invade the Stormlands in order to claim parts, or even all of it for themselves. Together with their troublesome vassals, the Wills of the Bone Way, the Ironwood kings are said to have invaded the Stormlands twice. King Euron Ironwood was the first Stone Way king to attack the Stormlands, but he was viciously defeated by King Durand the Young Durrandon during the Battle of the Bloody Pool. The second attack came with King Olyvar Ironwood, but he too was defeated by another Stormland king called Eric VII Durrandon. These failed conquests could have made the Ironwoods kings to turn their focus on conquering the entirety of Dorne, and in this, the Stone Way kings had much success, for Ironwood kings went on to conquer and rule over the largest portion of Dorne. The Ironwood kings conquered the entire coastline of the Sea of Dorne, and much of the eastern coastline of the Summer Sea. Access to these coastlines allowed the people of the Stone Way kingdom to establish trade with traders from Essos, and it also allowed the Ironwood kings to exact taxes on whomever settled on these coastlines, further enriching them. The Ironwood kings would then establish control of the Greenblood River. This river system was, and still is, the most important river system in the whole of Dorne, and conquering it granted the Stone Way kings control over the biggest population in Dorne, as most First Men that had stayed in Dorne had settled on its banks, or on its mouth on the Summer Sea. This in turn must have granted the Stone Way kings the ability to field the biggest armies in Dorne, and I think these powerful armies might have granted the Ironwoods the ability to conquer the rest of Dorne if it had not been for the onset of the Long Night. This horrific period must have devastated the Stone Way kingdom, as during this time, hundreds of thousands of Stone Way citizens must have been killed by the undead armies of the White Walkers. House Ironwood survived the Long Night, and they would eventually reclaim their mighty kingdom, and in time, the Stone Way kings gained enough power to pursue their old ambition of unifying Dorne under their rule. The Ironwood kings might have ignored the barren red dunes ruled over by the petty kings of House Dryland, opting to first conquer the rich and heavily populated kingdoms of the Torrentine and the Stone and Sky. Both these kingdoms had a lot to offer to the Ironwood kings, for the Torrentine kingdom was only second to the Stone Way kingdom in terms of wealth and population, and though not as rich as the Torrentine kingdom, the Stone and Sky kingdom was certainly powerful, for the Fowler kings controlled the Wide Way, which was the most important gateway in and out of Dorne, by land. The military might of the Ironwoods, and the possibility that they might have supported the Blackmonts and Manwoodies to destabilize the Danes and the Fowlers respectively, could have allowed the Ironwoods to take over these two kingdoms. But the combined strength of the Torrentine and Stone and Sky kingdoms, and probably aid from other houses in Dorne, allowed the Danes and the Fowlers to retain their independence from the overly ambitious Ironwoods. Despite this failure, the Ironwood kings retained their pompous and undeserved title of High Kings of Dorne, but they would never rule the whole of Dorne, and the coming of the Andals only further weakened them. For these proud and arrogant Stone Way kings must have been forced to marry Andal princesses in order to retain their kingdom. And they generally lost their nominal control over Dorne's eastern coast on the Summer Sea to Andal settlers, or to those who allied themselves with the Andals. However, it is stated that the Ironwood kings exacted some influence over the Martells from time to time, and they gained the allegiance of the Annals of House Corgyle, but this did not grant them the power needed to assail the Danes and the Fowlers combined. The end of the Stoneway Kingdom came with Princess Nymeria's conquest of Dorne. For after subduing the Torrentine and the Stone and Sky kingdoms, and other petty kings throughout Dorne, Prince Mors and Princess Nymeria led their forces against the Stoneway Kingdom, which was ruled by King Yorick V Ironwood. The Ironwoods fought fiercely to retain their independence, and King Yorick even killed Prince Mors during the Third Battle of the Bone Way. Princess Nymeria would take command of their army and she resumed the war against the Ironwoods, but it took 2 years of bloodshed for Nymeria to subdue King Yorick and force him to bend the knee. King Yorick was then sent to the wall in golden chains, on the orders of Princess Nymeria, and the ancient Stoneway Kingdom came to an end. House Ironwood became the most powerful of all the vassal lords under the rule of House Nymeros Martell in Dorne, and they would remain influential in political matters of Westeros. For like the Danes and the Fowlers, the Ironwoods fought fiercely against the Targaryen conquest of Dorne. However, when Dorne joined the Seven Kingdoms, House Ironwood sided with the Blackfyre pretenders multiple times because they were probably hoping that if the Blackfyres had defeated the Targaryens, the Martells, who had fought for the Targaryens in the Blackfyre rebellions, would then have lost their rule over Dorne, and Dorne could then have been awarded to the Ironwoods instead. However, this dream did not come to pass, for the Targaryens were victorious against the Blackfyres. More conflict would later on arise between the Ironwoods and their Martell overlords, when the then young Prince Oberyn Martell was found having sex with the paramour of Lord Edgar Ironwood. Furious by this discovery, Lord Edgar demanded a trial by combat against Prince Oberyn, and in this trial it was determined that whomever would draw first blood from the adversary would win. Records indicate that Prince Oberyn drew first blood, but the wound he inflicted on Lord Edgar festered, causing Lord Edgar's death. Prince Oberyn fled from Dorne to Essos, where he would stay in exile for some time. In more recent events in Dorne, the current Lord of House Ironwood, Lord Andus Ironwood, has proven his loyalty to the Prince of Dorne, Doran Martell, many times, for he even sent his heir, Sir Cletus Ironwood, and his nephew Sir Archibald Ironwood, to accompany Prince Doran's son, Prince Quentyn Martell, in Quentyn's quest to travel to Meereen in order to ask for Queen Daenerys Targaryen's hand in marriage. However, this quest ended up being a disaster, as Sir Cletus was killed during the journey, and even though Lord Andus Ironwood has thus far proved to be loyal to the Martells, news of Sir Cletus's death could once again cause a rift between the Ironwoods and the Martells. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel.